Hello again, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Thanks ever so much if you're joining us later on. Well, I do hope you are having a good day. Those of you who are here live, I really hope you enjoyed learning that lovely piece of Vivaldi. It appears we had a bit of an issue with the score. Apologies if you had the wrong score. Did make sure before we came online that it had just been updated, but I think some people had perhaps come along earlier on. Many apologies for that, and do hope it didn't spoil your enjoyment of the piece in the end. And of course, we will sing it on Sunday. It's a fantastic little piece and well worth doing when you get back to your face-to-face choirs. Well worth recommending to your musical directors, as I'm sure you will find out very shortly, as we're about to dive into the world of Vivaldi. Quite appropriate, really, for a Venetian composer, spent his life surrounded by water, and a lot of Vivaldi's music is very free-flowing. It's no surprise, I think, to many of you, particularly if you know how many pieces Vivaldi wrote, that the music flowed from his pen. Somebody famously said, one of his contemporaries, that he could write a concerto faster than anyone else could copy one out. That was probably meant as a rather backhanded compliment. I think it was a comment perhaps on Vivaldi's relatively simple harmonic style, but no one can deny that Vivaldi is an immensely important composer to the world of classical music. And yes, I just do hope that you are enjoying everything. Are people saying no view of Ben? Can everyone see me all right? Let me just double check before I launch into this. Bear with me a second. It's always the fear, isn't it? Can everyone see? Yes, you can see me. Good, good, good. That's all right then. So we're going to get started, everyone. So Dixit Dominus, if you've just been singing it with me, you know it's a work written for double choir. It was actually composed for a large orchestra with brass, and you know, the kind of work that you would expect to be performed on a grand sacred occasion. But before we dive into that work, let me tell you a little bit more about the great man himself. And to do that, I need to click on this and do that. There we are. So here he is. This is Antonio Vivaldi. His middle name was Lucio. Antonio Lucio Vivaldi. And he was born in 1678 and died in 1741. So he is a contemporary of Bach and a contemporary of Handel. He was a composer, a violinist, a teacher, an impresario, and a priest. And not necessarily in that order, but he certainly had a very, very interesting life. He was born, as I've already said, in Venice, and he's regarded really as one of the greatest composers of Baroque music. His influence spread across Europe, and in fact was vastly important in the development of the compositional style of Johann Sebastian Bach, whose concertos, and of which he wrote many, were based on having copied out by hand, well, what other way would you have used? Copied out loads and loads of Vivaldi's concertos. That was a way in which people would study music in those days, is to create copies. He composed hundreds and hundreds of pieces, particularly instrumental concertos for the violin and a variety of other musical instruments. You'll find out why shortly, as well as a number of sacred choral works. But he also wrote opera, and his best known work, as I'm sure you all know, is Quattro Stagioni, or The Four Seasons, which was a series of concertos for the violin. And these were important because they were extraordinarily programmatic, and that they told a very clear story. In fact, he would even write in the score which particular thing he was trying to that he was creating musically, whether it was the buzzing of bees, a barking dog, a braying donkey, or a massive storm. You know, Vivaldi was a very, very operatic composer. But obviously he was born, as we all are, he was born on the 4th of March in 1678 in Venice, and was baptized on the day of his birth, which itself was a very unusual thing in those days. A lot of the time people would wait a while to baptize their child because of the very sad fact that not everyone survived beyond the day of their birth. Now, the reason for his fast baptism seems to have been that he was born on the day of an enormous earthquake, and that his mother, I think, and the midwife would almost certainly have baptized him just in case. And you know, it's quite interesting that on the day he was born, the earth shook. Now, perhaps in the trauma of this earthquake, Vivaldi's mother dedicated him to the priesthood from a very early age. And he was subsequently given the ceremonies around his baptism 2 months after his initial baptism in this church here in Venice. Now, Vivaldi was the son of a barber, but a very talented barber. His father, Giovanni, was also a very gifted violinist and was his first violin teacher. And much like Mozart, Vivaldi showed a huge amount of promise as a musician from a very young age, was a bit of a prodigy, and his father took him on a tour of Europe where he would play the violin for the great heads of state. Again, very, very similar to Mozart. But unfortunately, Vivaldi had problems with his health. And one of the main issues was strettezza di petto, tightness of the chest, which these days we would know as severe asthma. And this didn't prevent him from learning to play the violin or composing or taking part in musical activities, but it did prevent him from playing wind and brass instruments. Now, at the age of 15, in 1693, Vivaldi started his formal studies to become a priest. He was ordained in 1703 at the age of 25 and was soon nicknamed Il Prete Rosso, otherwise known as the Red Priest, because of his shock of red hair, which was obviously kept under a wig most of the time, but not all the time. And it was clearly a family trait. His father had the same hair, and we know him now as the Red Priest. Some people seem to think that this nickname also refers to various other perhaps less salubrious traits of his. There is no evidence for that. It's almost certainly based on the colour of his hair. Now, not long after his ordination, only a year later, Vivaldi was given a special dispensation from celebrating Mass because of his ill health. He wasn't able to sing and present the Mass with the sort of volume and gusto that you need to fill a church because of his asthma. And Vivaldi only said Mass as a priest a handful of times, it turns out, and then appears to have withdrawn almost entirely from liturgical duties, though he did remain a member of the priesthood throughout his life. Now, there's also a rumour that the reason he was asked to not lead Mass is that he was caught on several occasions composing whilst he was supposed to be leading Mass. We don't know whether that's the case, but there's certainly a lot of people have written about this throughout the years. Now, the fact that he remained committed to the priesthood, despite not actually saying Mass and not following the liturgy professionally, it's suggested in the death records for him, which are in Vienna, and I'll explain about that in a minute. It actually reads Antonio Vivaldi, secular priest, which I think is very, very interesting. And one of his contemporaries, the Protestant composer Ernst Ludwig Gerber, wrote of him that he never put down the rosary unless he was picking up the pen to write an opera. So Vivaldi's faith was clearly an essential part of his life, even though he wasn't a practicing priest. The fact that he was ordained and had led Mass is at the heart, I think, of one of the things that makes him a special composer. Now, everyone, let's have a look now. Now, one of the most important aspects of Vivaldi's life was the fact that he worked at a special place called this Ospedale here in Venice, Ospedale de Pieta, which is one of 4 very important Venetian orphanages in the city, which placed a special emphasis on teaching music, particularly to girls. Now, these orphans, and first of all, the Ospedale, hospital, as I explained to those of you who came along to the Handle Around Sound course, doesn't mean what it means today. It's not a place to go when you're sick. It comes from from Ospedale, as in hospitality, a place where you could find sanctuary and you could be safe. And so these places were not poor. He was not dealing with waifs and strays and what you would call actual orphans. These were mostly the daughters of the rich noblemen of the city and their numerous mistresses. So that meant that these hospitales had generous endowments, a lot of money coming in. The girls were very well cared for and had the best tuition available. So Vivaldi was a teacher at this particular hospitale. There's a contemporary caricature of him. Doesn't look quite the same as that rather romantic looking portrait. It's very clear that he did have quite a prominent nose and chin from writings about him. Now, so this Ospedale here, where he performed and where he led music, he was involved with them until 1740, only a few years before his death. And because of the the breadth of his experience before he worked there, and because of his particular talents as a teacher, he was able to write and to lead enormously successful musical performances, and the reputation that he gained was absolutely superb. He also had another skill as a composer of opera, as I've already said, which he regarded as a bit of distraction from his day job at the Ospedale di Pieta. But, you know, the opera was an enormous part of life in Venice in the 17th and 18th century. If you remember from some of my earlier talks, Monteverdi had pretty much invented opera at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 17th century, and from that epicenter, that earthquake, if you like, of opera had radiated around the world. And so Venice was a bit like Hollywood for movies. Venice was the heart of opera. So Vivaldi was an opera composer and did very, very well. A visit to the opera was part of the social life of the city, and he was at the heart of that as well. Now, interestingly, the Ospedale della Pieta, shown here, now it doesn't exist anymore, it was demolished, and the church that you will find there now was a construction which was built after Vivaldi died, but there are still plaques there saying, you know, Vivaldi performed here. Interestingly, because these were all female ensembles at the Ospedale, of instrumentalists and choristers, to keep these girls, these young women, sheltered from the noblemen and travellers to the city who would come along and lech after them, they sang from the upper galleries of the church, often protected, hidden behind patterned grills. And this only added to the sort of theatrical element and the sense of drama which was matched by Vivaldi's music. And many, many people have written throughout the centuries about having visited this church, about having visited the galleries and heard this angelic music coming, and just to catch a glimpse of these beautiful girls hidden from sight, and just to see them from behind the grills was, you know, to stop the heart, as one man wrote. And those young men on tour through Venice would flock to Vivaldi's church to hear these mysterious women seen only in silhouette but sounding like angels. And in fact, there is a wonderful account of this by the philosopher and revolutionary architect Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who's a really important figure in the Enlightenment, in both the French and American revolutions. And he visited Vivaldi's church whilst Vivaldi was still there, and wrote of this later on, much later, in his book titled, interestingly, Confessions. He wrote, "I've not an idea of anything so voluptuous and affecting as this music. The richness of the art, the exquisite taste of the vocal parts, the excellence of the voices, the justness of the execution, everything in these delightful concerts concurs to produce an impression which certainly is not the mode, but from which I am of opinion no heart is secure." So I think the mystery created by the gallery, by the mystique of this, you know, this wonderful choir, this wonderful orchestra for which Vivaldi was composing, created this immense reputation, which Vivaldi was able to use for his benefit to some extent. Now, very sadly, things didn't work out so well for Vivaldi, but we'll find out more about that in a moment. Let's talk now a little bit about the Dixit Dominus itself. Now, those of you who've just learnt that first movement with me will agree it's very, very Vivaldian. It sounds like Vivaldi. It's because it is by Vivaldi. It's very much keeping it with his traditional style. However, it is grander than the Gloria, which is written for 4 parts, SATB, orchestra with oboe and trumpet. Dixit Dominus is written for double choir. It's written for large orchestra, and in fact it's in what we call the Venetian polychoral style. Poly meaning more than one, many, choral as in choir. And if you go back to the music of Gabrielli, for example, Monteverdi, you know, these musicians of the Renaissance, they wrote for multiple choirs to be stationed around these magnificent buildings to sing at each other from various galleries. And that created a very particular Venetian effect. If you go, in fact, to St. Mark's in Venice today, you can hear performances of it. And you know, in the years before you could experience Dolby surround sound, this was the only place really that you could hear that effect. So Vivaldi was calling back to all of his experience as a composer of opera for the drama, for his work as a concerto writer for the music in the orchestra, and of course his work as a composer of cantatas and church music for the choir. So interestingly, the choir is probably the most sedate element in the entire work. As we discovered then, singing the Dixit Dominus, the lines, for the most part, at least to the very end, the lines are quite simple. The grandeur and the spectacle comes from the orchestral writing that accompanies it. Now, it's a very festive piece. It's very, very beautiful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a little bit of that opening movement. Now, we heard it performed on the magnificent organ here of Patray Cathedral, but this is another wonderful performance here, which was recorded live in 2015. The details of this performance are in the description. I would urge you to go and listen to it. It's absolutely marvellous. It's a Dutch ensemble. Let's have a little bit of the opening here. Remember, the choir is used to deliver the liturgical text in a very, very pure and relatively simple way, at least till the end. But the orchestra is where the fireworks and the earthquakes happen. So here we go. Here's a little bit of the Dixit Dominus for two choirs. Here we go. So you see, have that magnificent drama of the fast-moving strings, the choir coming in almost like a liturgical chant against all of that majesty. We've got trumpets in thirds, we've got bassoons, we've got oboes. This would not have been a small-scale production, and just such vibrant, wonderful, wonderful music. And of course, a simple organ reduction doesn't capture the majesty of that. So let's move on. Let's have a talk about some of the other movements. So this is the text of the Dixit Dominus. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. And so a lot of the text of the Dixit Dominus is actually rather violent. The fifth movement, the Lord upon thy right hand shall wound even kings in the day of his wrath. The sixth movement, he shall judge among the heathen. He shall fill the places with the dead bodies and smite in sunder the heads over diverse countries. It's not a particularly cheery work. And Vivaldi really did rise to the occasion. Now, what I've got for you, everyone, is if we listen to a little bit of the second movement, which is again, is very dramatic. The Lord shall send the rod of thy power out of Zion, be thou ruler even in the midst among thine enemies. The idea of the enemies being dismissed, being sent away, lots of descending lines here. Let's have a little bit of this. Here we go, bear with me a moment. So that's the end of the first minute. Let's listen to the second movement here. A bit of a change, but very Handelian actually in terms of the dotted rhythms. Here we go. So we have this descending line from the choir as the rod of power is being sent out of Zion. It's fabulous writing, isn't it? So dramatic. Now, thank you, Mr. Vivaldi. Marvellous. Now, the entire work is well worth spending half an hour listening to, and there are some stunning performances. The sixth movement, though, I want us to jump ahead and talk about that. There's some beautiful, beautiful solos in between, which, if you know Vivaldi's Gloria, are very gentle and very lovely, very soothing. But the sixth movement is where things get truly operatic. He shall judge among the heathen, he shall fill the place of the dead bodies, and so on. It's almost apocalyptic, everyone. That's not the sixth movement, that's the first movement. But I'm going to play you this wonderful, wonderful movement here, all the way through. And so, as I say, it starts off with trumpets in antiphony with each other. And let's have a listen to this, because oops, I didn't press stop. Bear with me a moment. So this is pure, just pure drama, and as I say, almost apocalyptic. Here we go. This is the seventh movement. Here we go. That's the end of the sixth movement. Here we go. It's like the armies being marshalled. If I bring the words back up on screen for you. So this is the opening. So he shall judge among the heathen, effectively. So we've got Barocco bows. This holy court and God sitting in judgment. Okay, let's skip on. I'm just aware of time. Actually, no, it's about to get really very, very dramatic indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we know Vivaldi's dramatic writing from the Four Seasons. He's about to unleash hell, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely quite something. Here we go. Gentlemen, I mean, that is, as Nikki's put fire and violin emojis. I mean, that really is, it's just so Vivaldian. that moving from just sudden, from relative calm and peace to suddenly erupting into passionate violence in musical form. And nobody did it quite like Vivaldi. Now, the very end of this lovely, lovely work, which I really do commend to you all. Well, if we just jump straight to the Gloria part, if you are familiar with the way that liturgical works of the Baroque and classical era were written, well, this won't come as any surprise to you. There's a truncated version of the first movement, which we sang ourselves about half an hour ago. And you'll notice, obviously, the words are different. The setting is slightly different. It's all just squashed together slightly, but it's all recognized to be the same, making the whole thing a cycle. Here we go. So this is the last movement. So lovely. Now, of course, continues in that vein, but because it's the last movement, there has to be a fugue to finish. And there absolutely is. And this is where Vivaldi keeps his biggest musical fireworks for the very, very end. Sicut erat in principio, as it was in the beginning. So we get this. So a descending line from the tenors, nice and simple. And now. So you've got these incredibly fast semi-quaver passages, very hard to sing, but just building in intensity. This whole movement built on this descending line, basically a scale with everything else written around it, is extraordinarily clever and using all of his operatic skill to the max. I think we should award the orchestra a well-deserved round of applause. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is a stunning, stunning piece. It's one to listen to in your own time and really enjoy. I've seen people say, can we sing it? Well, you know, it's one for the list, I think, for SIC. I'll have to get Mark to play it 10 times, so I'm sure he'll fall in love with it. And just to say thank you ever so much for coming along today. I really hope you've enjoyed our afternoon with Vivaldi. Now, if you're going to be joining me later on for Around Sound, lots more to learn today. We're going to be looking at how to conduct in 3 and start to learn about rhythm and tempo, which in itself, it's going to tax our brains a little bit, everyone. So do take a bit of time, if you can, over the next hour and a half to just relax, maybe listen to a bit of Vivaldi, and I will see those of you who are coming along to that at 5 o'clock. The rest of you, enjoy the rest of your day. I will see you, of course, on Friday for Fun Friday. We will sing this lovely piece on Sunday, and then, of course, there'll be another pair of lovely things to look at next week. There'll be a classical piece on Wednesday and another deep dive. So well done, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.